The Master. I make mention of you. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. Thus, we mention the man Chaitra as the agent, rice as the object, and fire as the means of the action, expressed by the verb cook. Remember that metaphor cooking in Sufism? Let's see if that's where we go. We also observe that the words are so constructed as to give the meaning of the sentence as a reader is one who recites Vedas. Thus, if we say lives, we mean that he keeps the breath of life. And conversely, in this sentence, there is a manifestation of the meaning of words. But to determine whether a particular word denotes an action described by a verb or some relation therewith, we must withdraw from it. We must withdraw it from the sentence and analyze its formation by making distinctions. Without seed such an analysis, many a word such as bhavati or achva or ajapaya would remain ambiguous, because as regards to its outer form, might be analyzed either as a noun or as a verb. Akyata. We see as we go east, by east I mean away from the Semitic Persian languages, the noun and verb aspects can kind of be separated, particularly when you're talking about God. That you don't see that in some other cultures, but there's a distinction between these words and intended objects and presented ideas. To illustrate this distinction, the place whitens. Here the action of a verb is meant. The white palace. Here a relation is meant. That of the quality, white with the action or process which produced it. The word is in essence both an action denoted by a verb and a relation, and the termination at the end of the word conveys these meanings of action and relation. But why is this so? Because this process of whitening is identified with that, its result, the quality white, so that in conventional usage, the presented idea of these objects seems to be one and the same, but the white intended object is that which becomes the thing upon which the word and the presented idea depend. For this intended object, by reason of its own intensities, passes through evolved forms and does not correspond to the word, nor to the mental process, which are unchanging in themselves. Similarly, the word and the presented idea do not correspond the one with the other. The word changes in one way, the intended object in another way, and the presented idea in another way. Thus there is a distinction. And so it happens that by constraint upon this distinction, a yogin attains intuitive knowledge of the cries of all creatures. Here is another field of operation for constraint stated in Sutra 17. Word, knowledge. In this sutra, while his intention is to explain the word as an expression of meaning, he describes first all of the object of the functional activity of the vocal organ by saying, in this sutra, the voice is the organ of voice, in that which phenomenalizes the sounds of the syllables and has its 8 places of articulation. Well, you can kind of say 14 places of articulation if you look at it through terms of the Arabic alphabet. You got, 14 separated letters, and each in the Quran prefacing 29 chapters, forming 30 verses. But you have, these actually represent the variety of the sounds. Well, there's more to it than that, but there's Well, I guess, okay, you got dental, palatal, lateral. Well, cerebral is a particular thing in Sanskrit, but okay, I'm going to stop with that. Of the sounds of the syllables, the chest and the throat, and the head, and the root of the tongue, and the teeth, and the nose, and the lips, and the palate. Okay, okay. You know, they have 4 different ends. You got a nasal, you got a cerebral, you got a palatal, and you got a dental. And do you have a guttural end? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, no, you don't have a guttural end. The vocal organ has its function only in uttering the sounds of the syllables, as they are known to ordinary sense perception, and not as an expressive of meanings. He explains the object of the functional activity of the organ of hearing in the words with the organ of hearing. The organ of hearing, however, has that only as its object, which is mutated in the form of a particular sound of a syllable, which has as its essence a particular mutation of an emission of air, udana, subjected to contact, abingatan, with the various places of articulation belonging to the vocal organ, but its object is not a word expressing a meaning. He explains the object of the functional activity of the organ of hearing in the words, the organ of hearing. The organ of hearing, however, has that only as its subject, which is mutated in the form of a particular sound of a syllable, which has as its essence a particular mutation of an emission of air, udana, subject to contact, begotten, with various places of articulation belonging to the vocal organ. But its object is not a word expressing a meaning. This is what he wishes to say. Itye artha. He distinguishes the word expressing a meaning from the sounds of the syllables as known to ordinary sense perception by saying the word, it's as significant sound, but is the mental process that grasps the word as expressing meaning by ceasing the letter sounds, each in turn, anu, and binding them together into one word, having grasped the letter sounds, nada, as the sounds of syllables, varna, one by one as they are known in sense perception, and it binds them in turn, that is afterwards, so that they are made to change into a unity, and we can say go, and that is to say one word. By this mental process, the word is grasped, although each of the preceding mental processes by stages brings each word, so long as it has the form of the sounds of syllables, into consciousness, still the word expressing meaning does not clearly lie before us. But at the last mental act, vijnana, it becomes clear, and thus it is said, a mental process, Buddha, grasps the word as significant sound by seizing the latter sounds each in turn and binding them together into one word to the Mimamsaka, who maintains that the sounds of the syllables in themselves expressing a meaning, and that a word cannot be discerned as one because the sounds are heterogeneous. He replies, the sounds of the syllables. Now these sounds of the syllables must either each singly, pratyeka, arouse the idea, dla, blue, as having a word expressing meaning or its content, like a row of pegs upon which a bag of netted cords is hung, or an interesting thing you see about your typical devil card in a tarot is like you got the word Yahweh there, and the pegs driven down between the two people, which is the hay and the hay. So it's like you got Yahweh, the but that unity thing is missing. Anyways. R2. In combination, samhata, like the stones in which, when together, hold the pod. Not in any case the first alternative, because from the single sound of a syllable, the sense perception of the thing does not rise in consciousness, or because if it did proceed from a single one, the second and the third need not to have been uttered. For when an action is completed, a means of attaining that action, which adds nothing new, cannot be counted as nya yatapata, a means of attaining. Therefore, too, the second alternative remains, for the stones in combination can hold up the pot, because they are there at the same time, but the sounds of the syllables cannot be simultaneous. Accordingly, since it cannot be that aid is reciprocally given and received, they cannot by being together arouse the idea of the meaning. Those sounds of syllables not attaining by themselves to a single special word, and therefore not conveying the meaning, become now audible, abyss, and now inaudible, teras, like the iron rods of a tripod, which cooperate to hold a vessel. They are not, as being each by itself, termed a word. Okay, let me. (17) Word and intended object and presented idea are confused because they are erroneously identified with each other. By constraint upon distinctions between them, there arises intuitive knowledge, jnana, of the cries of all living beings. If, however, the sounds of the syllables were to attain to a word as a unit, by being each of itself identical with the word, then the defect mentioned before would not apply, as he says, on the other hand, the sounds of the syllables, one by one, may be said to have the essence of a word, being filled with the power to furnish expressions for everything, means having an accumulation of a great number of powers to indicate things. For the letter G occurs in words like Gau and Ganna, and Gaura and Naga, expressing various meanings, such as, for instance, the common nature of cows. Thus, the letter has the power to express this or that meaning. Likewise, the O occurs in words like Samma and Chotche, denoting the Ichvara, Ich coming from Ish, which is, ruler, aware, Lord, as the object intended. Well, the ultimate Ichvara is, of course, beyond objects and all that. This is to be said mutatis mutandis, with regard to all the letters. Furthermore, the sound of a syllable, such as b, which cooperates, in one set of cases, is the very same which is associated and connected with the sound of another syllable, such as O. These sounds of the syllables which have been so described are a general condition, bhava, or state. So a phonetic element. It's not Sanskrit is not an alphabetic language. It reads how it's written every time. These sounds of the syllables, which have been so described, are a general condition, bhava, or state. Therefore, they seem to pass into a multiplicity of forms, or plurality, but it does not actually pass into a plurality just because of its own particular state. The preceding sound of a syllable, the letter G by association with the following letter O, I don't remember the Sanskrit names for the letters, is thus distinguished from words like ganna, and the following letter O by association with the letter G is distinguished from words like koche, and thus becomes determined in the mental process, which seizes each in turn and binds them together to become a distinct and separate word expressive of the meaning, vachaka, and the common nature of the cow, to become the word prototype of the word cow. The connexion of ideas is this. This happens in the way because the presented idea of the thing cannot be affected by successive sounds of syllables which do not occur in a word in the fixed sequence, nor when heaven, our highest sacrificial merit, apurcha, is to be brought to pass. It is proper to say that just as sacrifices such as the agneya cooperate sahitya by means of purification, samskara, so the sounds of the syllables by means of subliminal impressions, samskara, cooperate in the production of the mental process of the thing. It is not proper to say this, because the argument breaks down when we apply the method of alternatives. Vikalpa, surely the subliminal impression, samskara, produced by the experiences of the sounds of the syllables, is either the one which generates memory, or it is the other which is called sacrificial merit, apurva, and is likened to the purification, samskara, by the agneya and similar sacrifices. Now, first of all, the second of these alternatives cannot be admitted because of the difficulties in the assumption. Okay, the agneya, the full moon one, upanchu, and agnistoma, 3 yagya on the first day after the new moon. So 6 sacrifices a month. Darchapur namasayaga. Okay. And remember, with some of the ones to follow, we have Buddha Yoga is the source of Buddhism, so keep that in mind, I guess. Now, the first of all the second of these alternatives cannot be admitted because of the difficulties in assumption, and must be assumed that this purification is the very same that which follows parva, sacrificial merit, whereas this word type, which is one, cannot be produced by experiences of the sounds and syllables in sequence, since we should have to assume the existence of many subsidiary purifications, samskara, each of the same kind as the others. It is this that is the difficulty. Furthermore, so long as we do not know that this purification serves as a cause to make the intended object known, it cannot be accepted to serving to produce this meaning. For a relation which is not known to serve the purpose of presenting the intended object cannot be accepted as serving that purpose. And as for the subliminal impression, which is inferred from the memory which is its result, it is restricted. See Book 1:11. I've already read that, by the way. To that object, namely the experience, which is its cause, and it is therefore not in a position to arouse a subliminal impression which has something else, namely the presentation of the intended object of that experience as its object. For if this were so, any one having experienced any object would be able to know any other object, and it is not right to say that the sounds and syllables which arise in the mirror of such a memory as takes its origin in the sum total, pinda, of subliminal impressions produced by the experience of each syllable singly, can express meaning, because if the sounds of the syllables are recognized as belonging together, for that would involve the conclusion that the idea of the intended object could be produced indiscriminately. Avichisana, whether the sounds of the syllables be expressed in a sequence or out of a sequence, are in reversed sequence. Now, reverse Torah rituals, I mean, come on, Joy of Satan. Saying things backwards sometimes even brings more of what you don't want. So generally you have linguistic nonsense by people who, oh, I'm going to say it backwards is blasphemy. Aren't you mentioning God more in those the following verses? No, I'm, you know, they don't know how to answer that, or they don't know it. They go from possibly figuring out what they're saying to maybe not even being able to find someone who tells them what they're saying. And it cannot be that this knowledge from memory can bring before itself. Gochara Yitum, that succession of sounds as syllables, which was active in the previous experience. Hence, insofar as it is not possible from the sounds of the syllables to have the presentation of an intended object, it must be supposed that there is an experience of the word as being single, which could give rise to the presentation of the intended object. The same objection, moreover, does not apply with reference to the word, for the word is phenomenalized by the sounds of syllables only when single and different according to the difference in the effort of articulation, and inasmuch as the words are alike insofar as they are produced through the action of the like places of articulation by sounds, which are the conditions which phenomenalize the various words, each unlike the other. The sounds do make a word similar to other words. This word go is similar to other words which have the G sound, but in other respects it is dissimilar, since their dissimilarities are different insofar as the various other syllables are associated with this syllable because of this particularity of this word, although it is one and altogether a unit. An avayava. Still, the sounds of the syllables make it appear as a collection. Savayava, and not just a unit. Just as a face, although it is one with a definite color and dimension and look, it is made to appear by reflection in a gem or sword blade or a mirror to be more than one, and as having more than one color and dimension and look. But this is not so in the strict sense. Whereas the sounds of the syllables are parts of the partless word, and are formed with the similarities and peculiarities. Therefore, the mental process, Buddha, of this word, in the case of a particular word, supports itself upon the word prototype, Svata, which is undivided and partless, although it seems to be divided and seems to have parts, and therefore a part, the letter G, I'm talking about the Sanskrit letter, I guess, of one particular word prototype, the word go, cannot cause that, namely, the partless prototype of which it, the G, is part, to come forth. Because of the similarity of this word prototype with that of words like gaura. Therefore, when made special and distinct by the letter O, it is able to cause that of which it is a part, namely the word prototype go, to come forth. Similarly, the part, which is the letter O, is not able, because of the similarity with words like choche, to cause that of which it is a part, namely the word prototype go, to come forth. So, when made special and distinct by the letter G, it is able to cause its own prototype to come forth. Although these two G and O do not naturally belong together, still through their subliminal impressions they do belong together. And thus it is consistent to have the relation a qualified and qualifier between them. See, it's symbolism and similarity and all that sort of stuff, but don't tell me stuff like in Kabbalah the word for snake in nature is this. The word for nature and God is the same number value, so okay, maybe. Snake and Messiah. Well, okay, you can make some but it's not inherent. It's only because you say them right. And thus, it is consistent to have the relation of qualified and qualifier between them. Nor can it be said that these two subliminal impressions have each a different object, since the experiences whose objects were the two parts, and also the two subliminal impressions which result from the experiences, have one word as their object. The word, moreover, is not distinctly avyakta, experienced, when only part of it is experienced, whereas it is perceived distinctly by the idea which seizes the sounds of that syllables in turn and binds them together, the idea which is produced by the subliminal impressions which arise from the experience of the parts. This is the difference, and we find that the first indistinct experience does produce a distinct experience by arousing subliminal impressions in a sequence of degrees of distinction, just as the presented idea that the tree, when seen from a distance, is green, harata, although indistinct, leads to the distinct presented idea of the tree. But this kind of an idea is impossible in an experience wherein the sounds of the syllables should represent intended objects. A lot of trees are like that. From a distance, it can be majority green, but when you get up close, it's not. It's all brown and stuff. For surely, but this kind of idea is impossible for an experience wherein the sounds of the syllables should represent intended objects. For surely one cannot say that the sounds of the syllables do each singly give rise to an indistinct presented idea of the intended object and ultimately to a distinct idea. For distinctness and indistinctness are restricted to causes of perceptive thinking. But in this case, presentation of the intended object is to be aroused by the syllables and is not a perception. So if this unperceived presentation of the intended object is produced by the sounds of the syllables, it would be produced quite clearly, sputa, or it would not be produced at all. But it could not be unclear. Whereas for the word prototype, you have to assume a clear or unclear form, in that there is a perception of it, made distinct by sounds. So the case is not analogous, in that the word cannot be perceived unless sounds be distinct, whereas the sounds can be distinctly perceived. So superpower number 17 is basically the picking apart of language, right? Thus the sounds of the syllables combined in the mental process, which seizes them in turn and binds them together, and which has its origin in the organ of hearing. In this, together with the subliminal impressions generated by the experience of the sounds of the syllables one by one, becomes the word prototype of a single word. If there should be an alternation of the sequence, then insofar as there might not be any special and distinct effort of the organ of voice, giving heed to the fixed order, which would set in operation the special and distinct effort that alone can make this word prototype manifest, it would follow that there would be no manifestation of it at all, insofar as the sounds of the syllables conform to this sequence, and are determined by being the conventional usage for the intended object. They display as their object a word as it is, usually understood as having parts, and as having its determination by conventional usage only. Whatever that number might be, means 2 or 3 or 4, 5 or 6, though competent indicate a great number of things. A certain number of these sounds of syllables makes but the one intended object clear to consciousness. For example, go makes clear to consciousness only the one object known as cow. Hence, Govinda, having its dewlap and other specific features. It might then be said that the sounds of the syllables only, insofar as they accord with conventional usage, have expressive power, and accordingly there is no so-called word which is a unit. In reply to this, he says, hence, of these, into a fixed sequence of sounds means a sequence caused by sounds, seized and bound together, are those in whose case the sequence of sounds is of that kind, which the mental process makes known, in the sense that it is made known or becomes clear by reason of the mental process. It has been said, in harmony with the view of persons of not very fine insight, that the G and the O and the H are determined by conventional usage as denoting the thing termed cow. And this is so because, insofar as the G and the other sounds of syllables are parts of this word, they are identical with it, and so expressive of its meaning. But we are of the opinion that, as anyone can see, it is a unity that is called a word which expresses a meaning. This he makes clear by saying this unity, the connexion of ideas, is that this unity termed by a word is by an ordinary mental process believed to be made of sounds of syllables. Why should it be a unit? In reply to this, he says, object of a single mental process. It is a unit, since it is the object of that mental process, which is a unit in the form that one says, go. And that is one word. And so, okay, we have semantics. We have, obviously the literal meaning. You have the contextual. We have symbolic readings that we can look at language with, but let's try to say what something is literally. You don't say, oh, there's this thing in this other language and this is how they would say it. It's like, I am is a proverb. And, there's a bunch of examples that I could say, but namaste, we make mention of each other. Hopefully not too exaggerated.